To change the world, you first have to be brave enough to break the existing rules. Join our journey through the stories of rebels and outcasts who dared to dream of something better. Click subscribe now and join the ranks of those who dare.
I wiped the flour off my hands with the dish towel Raymond gave me the Christmas before he passed. The one with the little holly leaves faded almost to nothing from washing, and I answered my daughter's call on the second ring. She wanted to talk about centerpieces. I stood at my kitchen counter in Charlotte, North Carolina, 63 years old, retired school teacher, owner of 4 rental properties, and a mother who had spent 31 years making sure her daughter never went without a single thing she needed. And my daughter wanted to talk about centerpieces. "Mom, do you like the eucalyptus with the white roses or just the roses alone?" I told her the eucalyptus. She laughed and said her future mother-in-law, Diane, preferred just the roses. I told her it was her wedding and she could have whatever she wanted. You want to know what I didn't know then? I didn't know that in 4 weeks, I would make 2 phone calls that would quietly dismantle everything Diane had been building for months. I didn't know my daughter would stand in my kitchen crying. Not because she was hurt, but because she finally understood. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Margaret, and this is what really happened. My daughter's name is Callie. She is 32 years old, and she has her father's eyes. That particular shade of brown that looks almost gold when the afternoon light comes through the windows. Raymond died when Callie was 24. Heart attack, quick, the kind of thing you never see coming and never fully recover from. After Raymond passed, it was just the 2 of us. I went back to work full-time, kept the house, managed the properties, and made sure Callie finished her master's degree without borrowing a dime. She graduated, got a good job in healthcare administration, and 3 years ago she met a young man named Patrick at a work conference in Atlanta. Patrick is pleasant enough. He remembers birthdays and holds doors open and once drove 40 minutes in the rain to help me carry furniture when one of my tenants moved out. I have nothing against Patrick. His mother, Diane, is another matter entirely. I met Diane at a Sunday dinner about 6 months into Callie and Patrick's relationship. She came in wearing a cream-colored blazer and the kind of smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes. She hugged me and said, "We're going to be family," in a tone that sounded more like a warning than a welcome. I am not a woman who jumps to conclusions. I am a woman who taught 6th grade for 27 years. I know the difference between someone who is nervous and someone who has already decided how they feel about you. Diane had already decided. She made little comments. Subtle ones. The kind you can't really respond to directly without seeming oversensitive. She mentioned twice that her side of the family traveled in certain circles in Raleigh. She asked me what neighborhood I lived in and then nodded slowly when I told her. The way people do when the answer confirms something they already suspected. She complimented my sweet potato pie and then said to Callie, "Just loud enough for me to hear. Maybe the caterer can do something a little more refined for the rehearsal dinner." I smiled. I helped clear the dishes. I drove home and sat in my driveway for a while before I went inside. I called my sister Yvonne that night. Yvonne said, "Margaret, don't borrow trouble." I told her I wasn't borrowing anything. I could feel it coming for free. When Patrick proposed to Callie last spring, she called me first. She was crying the happy kind of tears, and I stood in my kitchen laughing and crying right along with her. We spent the first hour just the 2 of us on the phone, talking about her father and how much he would have loved this moment. Then the planning started. Callie and Patrick agreed early on that they wanted a wedding in October, a Saturday outdoor ceremony at a venue outside Charlotte, seated dinner for about 120 guests. Beautiful. Reasonable. Exactly the kind of wedding I had saved for. And I had saved. I want to be clear about that because it matters to what comes later. After Raymond passed, I set aside money every single year in an account I called Callie's Future. Not because I expected anything in return. Because she is my daughter and her joy is my joy. And that is what mothers do. I offered Callie and Patrick $80,000 toward the wedding. That was not a loan. That was a gift. Patrick's parents contributed $15,000. I am not saying this to keep score. I am saying this because you need to understand what was at stake when certain decisions were made. Diane inserted herself into the planning immediately. She had opinions about everything. The venue, the menu, the invitation font, the color of the bridesmaids' dresses. Callie, who has always been a people pleaser in ways that sometimes worried me. Let it happen. She would call me and say, Diane really wants this, or Diane thinks we should do that, and I would listen and mostly stay quiet. I told myself it was her wedding. I told myself to let it go. I told myself to let it go. I told myself that right up until the Tuesday I called Callie to ask about the seating chart. I had a specific question. I wanted to know where my table would be. Not because I needed a place of honor, but because my knees had been giving me trouble and I wanted to make sure I wasn't walking a long distance from parking. A practical question from a 63-year-old woman with bad knees. Callie hesitated. I know my daughter. I have known her since before she took her first breath. I know every shade of hesitation she has. Mom, she said, we're still working out the seating. I asked her to just give me a general idea. Another pause. Then you'd be near the back. It's actually a really nice spot. There's a window nearby. Near the back, I said. Mom, it's not like that. Where is Diane's table? She didn't answer right away. She didn't have to. I already understood. I told Callie we would talk later. I put the phone down on the counter very carefully. I did not slam it. I am not that kind of woman. And I stood at my kitchen window looking out at the backyard. The Japanese maple Raymond planted the year Callie was born was losing its leaves, red and gold all over the grass. I thought about him. I thought about all the years. I thought about the Callie's future account, and the $80,000 in the centerpiece conversation, and Diane's smile that never reached her eyes. Then I thought about what Yvonne always says. A person will show you who they are if you give them enough time and enough rope. I had given plenty of both. I did not call Callie back that evening. I did not call Diane. I did not say a word to anyone. What I did was sit down at my kitchen table with a cup of tea, and I thought the whole thing through, not with anger. I was past anger by then. Anger is loud, and I have never been a loud woman. What I was feeling was something quieter and much more certain. I thought about the $80,000. I thought about the contract I had signed at the venue, which, by the way, was in my name because I was the one who put down the deposit. I thought about the florist, who was the daughter of a woman I had taught in 1998 and who had given me a family discount as a kindness. I thought about the caterer, who was a member of my church and who had told me specifically, Miss Margaret, anything you need, you just call me. I thought about all of this very carefully. And then I went to bed. I slept better than I had in weeks. The next morning, I called my daughter. I want to tell you exactly how that conversation went, because it matters. Callie answered on the first ring, which told me she had been waiting. Her voice was careful in the way it gets when she knows a hard conversation is coming. I did not make her wait for it. I said, Callie, I love you. That is the first thing and the most important thing, and it is never going to change. She said, Mom. I said, I need you to let me finish. I told her that I had been thinking since yesterday. I told her that I had not come to any decision in anger. I told her that I understood she was trying to keep the peace with Patrick's family, and that I understood how much pressure she was probably under, and that I had no intention of making her wedding day difficult. Then I said, I've decided to withdraw my contribution. She went silent. I kept my voice steady. I told her that I had spoken to the venue and that since the primary contract was in my name, I would be canceling the booking. I told her that I had called the florist the previous night gently, without drama, and withdrawn my order. I told her that the money I had set aside was still hers, but that it would go into a different account, one that was not tied to this specific event. This specific event, she repeated. Her voice had gone very quiet. This specific event, I said, where I have been assigned a seat near the back window while the woman who contributed $15,000 sits at the front. She started to cry. I did not cry. I had done my crying the night before, alone in my kitchen, and I was finished with that part. I said, Callie, you are my heart. You always will be. But I will not pay $80,000 to be an afterthought at my only daughter's wedding. That is not something Raymond would have allowed, and it is not something I'm going to allow either. She said, Mom, I didn't. Diane said it made more sense. She said you'd be more comfortable. Sweetheart, I said. When did you stop being the one who decides what's comfortable for your own mother? There was a very long silence. Then she said, What do I do? I told her that was not my question to answer. I told her she was a 32-year-old woman who was about to make a lifelong commitment and that the time to understand whose voices mattered was right now, before the wedding, not 10 years into a marriage. I told her I loved her. I told her to take some time. I hung up the phone and I washed my breakfast dishes and I went out to rake the leaves from under Raymond's maple. The next 48 hours were not quiet. Diane called me. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was composed and controlled and said that she hoped we could find a solution that worked for everyone. I listened to it once and deleted it. Patrick called. I answered that one because I respect Patrick and I believe he deserved to hear my voice directly. He was upset. Not angry at me, I don't think, but frightened in the way young men get when things are falling apart and they don't know whose side to stand on. I told him, Patrick, I think you are a good man. I think you love my daughter. I need you to understand that what happened here was not about a seating chart. It was about whether my daughter has been coached to see me as less than, and whether that is the household she is building. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Mrs. Moz, Margaret, I didn't know about the seating until after Callie called me yesterday. I believed him. I still believe him. I still believe him. I said, then you have some conversations to have. He said, yes, ma'am. And he meant it. Yvonne came over that Thursday with cornbread and collard greens, and she sat at my kitchen table with me until nearly midnight. She didn't tell me I'd gone too far. She didn't tell me I should have let it go. She just sat there with me the way sisters do, and at one point she said, Raymond would have made that call himself. Day one. I laughed for the first time in 4 days. She's right. Raymond was the most generous man I have ever known, but he had a line, and once someone crossed it, that was it. He would say, generosity isn't weakness, but confusion about who you are, that's weakness. I've tried to live by that. The wedding did not happen in October. I want to be accurate here. It was postponed, not called off entirely. Callie and Patrick are still together. They moved the date to the following spring, and this time, the planning looks different. What happened in those weeks between my phone calls and the postponement is not entirely my story to tell, but I will tell you what Callie told me because she told me herself, sitting at this same kitchen table, and she said I could share it. She said that when everything fell apart, she and Patrick had some of the most honest conversations they'd ever had. She said that she had been letting Diane make decisions because it felt easier than conflict. She said that somewhere along the way she had started seeing my feelings as a problem to be managed, rather than a priority to be honored. She said that scared her. She said, Mama, I think I forgot who raised me. I reached across the table and held her hand, and I did not say anything for a little while. Then I said, you didn't forget. You just got confused for a minute. It happens. She said, how are you so calm about all of this? I told her the truth. I said, because I was never fighting with you, baby. I was just refusing to disappear. The new venue is smaller. 100 guests instead of 120. The flowers are simpler. The menu is shorter. And you know what? It is going to be the most beautiful wedding I have ever seen in my life, because my daughter chose every single thing in it herself. My table is in the front, not because I demanded it. Because Callie put me there without me asking. She called me to tell me, and her voice was proud in a way that made my chest ache with something that is hard to describe. Somewhere between grief and gratitude, which is often where the truest love lives. I've been thinking about what I would say to a woman in my position. A woman who is older, who has given everything she has to a child she loves, who finds herself being quietly pushed to the edges of the very life she helped build. I have been thinking about what I wish someone had told me years ago, before it got to the point where I had to make those phone calls. Here is what I would say. Your love is not a transaction, but your resources are real, and the decision about where they go is yours. There is nothing selfish about understanding that. There is nothing wrong with a woman saying, I have value, and I will not pretend otherwise to keep the peace. I have spent a lifetime pouring myself into other people, into my students, into my tenants, into Raymond, into Callie. I do not regret a single drop of it. But I am 63 years old, and I know something now that I wish I had understood at 30. Generosity given to people who do not see you is not kindness. It is erosion. The morning after I made those phone calls, I woke up early and made myself a real breakfast, eggs and toast, and that good strong coffee Raymond liked. And I sat on my back porch while the sun came up. The Japanese maple was bare by then, all its leaves down, just the branches standing clean against the sky. And I thought, that tree is not gone, it's just waiting for the right season. I understood then that I was not destroying anything. I was just waiting, quietly and without apology, for the season that was meant for me. It is coming. I can feel it, and this time I will be sitting at the front. I have been thinking about what Margaret's story really teaches us, not just about weddings or money or seating charts, but about the quiet laws that govern how we treat people, and what eventually comes back around because of it. There is a principle I have come to believe in completely, not because anyone taught it to me from a book, but because I have lived long enough to watch it work. What we do to others, the small dismissals, the deliberate erasures, the casual cruelties we think no one will notice. Those things do not disappear. They accumulate, and at some point, the weight of them tips the scale in ways we never anticipated. Diane did not lose a wedding venue because of bad luck. She lost it because she built her plans on a foundation that required another woman's dignity to be the price of admission. That is not a foundation. That is a trap. And traps, eventually, close on the people who set them. Margaret did not win because she was clever, though she was. She did not win because she was angry, because she never really was. She won because she understood something that takes most of us decades to learn, that self-respect is not stubbornness. It is not pride. It is the most basic form of honesty, the honesty of knowing your own worth and refusing to perform otherwise. That kind of honesty requires intelligence, not the kind measured in test scores, but the kind that comes from paying attention over a long period of time. Margaret paid attention. She noticed the smile that didn't reach the eyes. She noticed the slow nod at the mention of her neighborhood. She noticed the pause in her daughter's voice before the words near the back. Wisdom is often just sustained, careful attention, and Margaret had been practicing it for 63 years. But what moves me most about her story is what she did with what she knew. She did not explode. She did not confront Diane at a family dinner. She did not give Callie an ultimatum soaked in guilt. She sat quietly with the truth, thought it through, and then acted from a place of complete steadiness. That is not a small thing. That is the hardest kind of courage, the kind that doesn't look like courage from the outside, but costs everything on the inside. And Callie. I think about Callie most of all, because Callie is not a villain in this story. She is something more familiar and more painful, a person who slowly learned to see her own mother through someone else's eyes. It happens. Love makes us porous. We absorb the judgments of the people we are trying to belong to. The real question is whether we catch it in time. Callie caught it. And the relationship she is rebuilding with Margaret now is not the same as the one before. It is stronger, because it has been tested and chosen again on purpose. That is what integrity produces, eventually. Not just justice for one person, but clarity for everyone close enough to witness it. I think about Raymond's maple tree, bare in November, just branches against the sky, still rooted, still alive, waiting for the season that was made for it. Some of us are like that tree right now, quiet, stripped back, wondering if the spring is still coming. It is, but only if we hold the ground.